the local church in an organic way. So the church was once a seminary, but chapter 2 says the seminary left the church. In chapter 2 of this presentation, you'll see that I talk through some paradigmatic issues. What's a paradigm? A paradigm is a scientific word that talks about those things which are permissible or authorized to observe or worthy to be observed, the kinds of questions and an implied range of answers. It implies how the questions are structured and how results should be interpreted. If you'll look at just the way some of the elements that go into the definition of paradigm, you'll see that the word authority, the imperative mood, regulated sources come around the language of paradigms. In other words, a paradigm causes you to see what's permissible to see, but it also filters out what is not been admitted or valued. It's a kind of groupthink, if you will, which puts some things on the table and some things off the table. A credentialing society is a society which values diplomas, degrees, the symbols that go from that. Credentialed societies live in the paradigm that says folks who cross graduation stages have something of a qualitative nature that folks who haven't walked across graduation stages don't have. Now, that's only true because someone says it's true. But I know old farmers who've never gone to seminary or to college, who have a lot of wisdom, and you know them too, who have something that people who walked across graduation stages don't have, and yet they don't have credentials. This is the old Wizard of Oz wisdom that he gives to Dorothy and the lion and the Tin Man and the Scarecrow. That most of what you need you find in your own backyard, you have in your heart. And then he gives the folks credentials and badges and those kinds of things. You may remember the story. But that's paradigm stuff. One of the paradigms I want to talk through in the chapter 2 of this presentation is how the seminary drifted away from the concrete, relational, life-on-life approach that we saw with Jesus and the 12 and Paul and the 16. And I present it to you on a slide there. I won't talk through that at this point. Chapter 3 says the church then went to seminary. I spend the second part of the presentation, the historical walkthrough, looking at how the church makes a move back towards seminaries. The first half looked at the New Testament, then the post-apostolic era where monastic orders came from, the medieval era where European universities came from, right down to the colonial era where the Harvards and the Yales and the Princetons, these came into existence, and where we first began to experience the theory-practice divide. If you were a minister in the Virginias, you'd have to travel up to Massachusetts and get your studies at a congregational seminary, and then go back to the colonies, back down to Virginia, to do the ministry. And of course, you lived on campus, so the theory to practice gap was the first time in history we had that possibility. As the industrial era came along with automation, efficiency, empirical systems, seminaries in many ways became like degree mills or pastor mills where 40 pastors could be sitting in a room. This was very much in contrast to a minister that was sat with a tutor, or 2 or 3 ministers sitting around a tutor reading divinity, or in the law school reading law. In the industrial era, we moved from preparing a person for a role rather than to merely preparing a person, as we had had in all the other eras. And as the information era comes about, with its emphasis on professionalization and niches and sound bites and on-the-job training and a 2.0 world, mega churches, a bias towards practicality, in such a world, the value of mentors came up to surface again. On-the-job training was possible because someone could teach another person and show another person and authorize another person, legitimize a person through practical training. In this time frame, this postmodern turn, a lot of Western institutions have come under critique, the seminary or higher education being one of them. So that these institutions no longer had a privileged norm, but rather they came under critique. If they couldn't deliver the goods, deliver bottom lines, then they could be debunked and put on the pile with other things which found their place in a flat culture. So having credentials did not equal having credibility. With this turn, you'll see that I have a slide in there that's kind of circular in nature. You can see that we've come back to a New Testament norm. With the OJT 2.0, the flatness sort of world, we're back to a world where a master and a few apprentices could get together and one person could validate what was happening formation-wise in another person. The apprentice guild model is back. And it can happen online, it can happen inside of a seminary, it can happen at church. We're dealing with a flat world. In that way, the seminary has gone back to church. What I've been focusing on in my sabbatical, my last two sabbaticals, has been a recognition that people are finding significant and deep and satisfactory formation at home. We're finding that that churches are equipping their own people through a deep ecology. I looked at one organization in particular that did a significant job of this. I'll talk about it in a minute, but it's called the Biblical Institute of Leadership Development. You've been reading the Paradigm Papers. I've been putting that before you as a case study that's not idealistic, but it's being worked out with more than 100,000 adherents of individuals who've gone through the build-type training inside of a church context, who've become apprentices and have become apprentices to others. I'm wanting to borrow on their ground level reality and pass it on to you as my proposal for what you can do practically with this course. We've taken a long time to get here, but now you can hear it. That at the point that we find the leaders, the called leaders around you, the people who are called, the people who are developing leaders themselves, who are prepared to develop another leader around them, who are creating cultures where leaders can be formed, if they can install the software of a deep church, of a deep ecology that consistently generates leaders, they might find that $80,000 may go a long way in a local context, forming 7 apprentices rather than sending one off to a residential seminary. And they'll find the satisfaction of being able to say that they are living the Ephesians 4 adventure. Well, what will it take to do that? Look at the slide that's called, looks like it's slide 37, called Dispositions Shaped by Deep Ecology. On it, you'll see 7 values that are expressed inside of deep ecology churches. The primary value is doxological. I don't mean singing, but I mean being keepers of the glory of God. People who are expanding in becoming heavy, looking into His face. This is a 2 Corinthians 3:18 sort of way. As we look into His face, we're transformed by the same light that we look into. This, I believe, is the primary call of every Christian, that we become a witness of glory and become impacted and glorious. Next, we are missional. Glory by its nature is outshining. This is where evangelism comes from. This is where healing the broken comes from. This is where reaching out and touching others comes from. Getting self-transcending as far as we can find shadows. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. That's what we should be as a people. So that's the missional dimension of our ecology. Then sacramental, that we become the bread of